There is way more happening in this bathroom scene than you probably realized, and it's all part of why I think the Super Mario Bros. Movie isn't nearly as dumb as people make it out to be, as there were a lot of smart and clever decisions that went into it. From how it condenses decades of Mario's lore in a way that makes sense, or how plot points are smartly set up in advance that pay off in spades later, or even how multiple events are subtly teased or foreshadowed completely seamlessly, including this post-credit sequence, because we actually saw this Yoshi egg before it appeared in the sewers of New York. As we can see, it's actually a wedding gift, meaning it was in the perfect place to get sucked through the warp zone. Then, when it comes to the lore, making the Kongs literal grease monkeys was a stroke of genius. Not only do I love the visual pun, but more in how it elegantly ties together two completely different but iconic parts of Mario and Donkey Kong's history. The first of which is of course the obvious Mario Kart connection, especially considering how banana peels have been a staple of the entire series. Plus, it's just fun seeing an origin story for all those carts came from in the first place. And speaking of carts, that brings us to the second item, as these carts are a perfect stand-in for the mine carts that the Donkey Kong series is famous for, including the twisty turning nature of their track design. And then tying it all into a Mad Max style chase was just... Comedy-wise, we have to talk about Lumalee, the literal star of the show.
Time, like hope, is an illusion.
On the surface, his hilariously dark demeanor stands in stark contrast to the adorable smiling veneer he puts on. But for hardcore Mario fans, the joke goes even deeper, as it makes perfect sense within this universe, pun intended, because Lumalee is a Luma, a species whose entire purpose is to transform permanently into other celestial bodies, like planets and stars. Meaning this star doesn't exactly have a death wish so much as it wants to fulfill its true purpose. Next, Mario hating mushrooms is not only deliciously ironic and a pretty funny twist on nearly 40 years of game knowledge, but it also ties into his character arc, because to fulfill his physical need, to become big and strong, he has to embrace the very thing he hates, mushrooms, just like how he ends up having to do the same thing for his internal need too, which is to embrace the very thing he never thought of as
a great thing.
Did you catch how the Francis fight foreshadows at least 3 events in the movie? Now, we already covered the mirror's connection with the manhole, but the way in which Mario distracts a Bomber Bill is a direct callback to this Francis fight, where when Mario's trying to distract him to get him off Luigi, he desperately searches around him to find something to distract him with. Just as Mario ends up looking around at the Bomber Bill before realizing his tail can serve that same purpose. Furthermore, in both cases, it ends up drawing the character's attention, which is exactly what Mario wanted. But then it puts the focus squarely on him. And as it turns out, he ends up dodging them both in the same way, flipping over them as they go underneath. And it ends up trapping them in both cases, one in the shower, the other in the warp zone. But the difference is, where it was more of a reflex with Francis, it was a deliberate effort to foil the Bomber Bill, which demonstrates he actually learned something from Francis. Speaking of parallels, we can see that the training montage is also reflected in the final battle, because the way Peach ends up kicking Bowser is the exact same way she did the cardboard cutout in the training sequence. Yeah, she's been training for that moment her whole life. Similarly, Mario bounces off a volley of bullet bills in the exact same way both times. And just before getting eaten by a piranha plant. Both times. Which isn't just funny, but it shows his growth too, as the second time it happens, it doesn't stop him. Then, Bowser's fate in the movie is almost too poetic, 3 times over, because the way in which Peach initially deals with him, by freezing a fire-breathing turtle in place, is a complete inversion of how the movie began, with Bowser using his fire breath to melt an ice kingdom. From the very beginning, this was set up as a battle of fire versus ice.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Second is when Peach shoves a mini mushroom down his throat, making him shrink. And not just because of how it cleverly ties back to this line from earlier,
Come to Brooklyn, I'll buy you a turtle.
which is already a cute touch, but also how it makes Bowser both small and powerless, which were the exact 2 things that Mario hated about himself.
Sick and tired of feeling so small.
And that it's all because of a mushroom, something else that Mario hated, is just hilariously on the nose. Especially with how Peach force-fed it to both of them. And to top it all off, Bowser ends up in a cage, just as he did to poor Luigi. Talk about just desserts. Finally, even the Easter eggs are cleverly interwoven throughout the movie, in the sense that they fit in perfectly naturally without interfering with the story. In fact, some of the ways in which the Easter eggs are incorporated into the story is nothing short of brilliant. Let's take Mario and Luigi's plumbing commercial for example.
We're the Mario Brothers, and plumbing's a game.
On the surface, it seems to be just a fun reference to the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, a cartoon that many of us grew up with. Yet at the same time, it seamlessly sets up our main characters, hints at their wants and desires,
To save Brooklyn.
And the Queen
ties it into Mario's character arc,
I am so glad we spent our life savings on this commercial.
and then brings it back as an essential part of the movie's climax. Once again,
That is not a commercial. That is cinema.
it's just brilliant. And that's just a few of the reasons why the Mario movie is smarter than you think. And yet, some people still consider this entire movie to be pointless, which we'll directly address in the final part of our ongoing Mario movie analysis series, which you can ensure you don't miss by clicking the subscribe button and ringing the bell. And in the meantime, if you missed any of the prior 10 parts, just check out the playlist that's on the screen right now. And with that, we'll catch you in the next video.